In today's video, we examine the worst animal attacks during African safaris. From a photographer who waded into the waters ignoring warnings about crocodiles, to a teacher who left the safety of her Serengeti campsite to walk to the bathroom facilities.
It's March 14th, 2016, and the golden afternoon light was beginning to slant through the acacia trees of Kruger National Park in South Africa. The dry season had left the landscape parched and dusty, with scattered branches of yellow grass stretching endlessly toward distant kopjes. The air shimmered with heat waves, and the only sounds were the distant calls of guinea fowl and the soft rumble of safari vehicles navigating the gravel roads that crisscross this vast wilderness. David Thornton had been photographing African wildlife for over a decade, and at 41, he considered himself one of the best freelance photographers working the continent. His portfolio was filled with stunning close-up shots that other photographers envied, images that required getting dangerously close to some of the world's most lethal predators. He'd built his reputation on taking risks that others wouldn't, often ignoring park safety guidelines to capture the perfect shot. This trip to Kruger was supposed to be the culmination of years of work, a final collection of images for a coffee table book that would cement his legacy. David had been tracking a particular pride of lions for 3 days, studying their movements and waiting for the right moment. He'd grown comfortable around these animals, convinced that his years of experience had taught him to read their body language and predict their behavior. That afternoon, David spotted a magnificent male lion resting in the shade of a marula tree about 200 yards from the main road. The lion was massive, easily 400 pounds, with a dark, full mane that marked him as the pride's dominant male. He lay stretched out in the dappled shade, seemingly oblivious to the world around him, his massive head resting on his paws. African lions are apex predators that have ruled the savanna for millennia. Adult males can weigh up to 500 pounds and reach speeds of 50 miles per hour in short bursts. During mating season, which typically occurs from May to August, males become extremely territorial and aggressive, defending their pride and mating rights with lethal force. Their powerful jaws can exert over 650 pounds of pressure per square inch, easily capable of crushing bone and severing spinal cords with a single bite. David parked his rental vehicle about 100 yards away and studied the lion through his telephoto lens. The shot was good, but not great. The angle was wrong, and the vehicle's presence in the frame would ruin the natural composition he was after. He'd taken similar shots from vehicles dozens of times before, but this one demanded something different, something that would set it apart from every other lion photograph ever taken. Against every rule he'd ever been taught, David quietly opened his vehicle door and stepped onto the dusty ground. He moved slowly, camera in hand, using the scattered thorn bushes as cover as he approached the resting lion. The animal's ears twitched occasionally, but he showed no signs of alarm as David crept closer, stopping at what he estimated was about 30 feet away. The lion's massive head lifted slightly, yellow eyes focusing on the human intruder with predatory intensity. David froze, finger poised over his camera shutter button, waiting for the perfect moment. What he didn't realize was that this particular male was experiencing heightened territorial stress, an early surge of aggression that sometimes occurs before the peak mating season, triggered by competition from younger males challenging his dominance. The lion rose to his feet in one fluid motion, his massive frame uncoiling like a spring. David managed to snap 2 photos before the predator's demeanor changed completely. The lion's ears flattened against his skull, his tail began twitching with agitation, and a low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. David took a step backward, finally recognizing the danger he'd placed himself in. But it was already too late. The lion exploded into motion with terrifying speed, covering the 30-foot distance between them in less than 3 seconds. David turned to run, his camera bouncing against his chest as he sprinted toward his vehicle, but the lion's powerful legs carried him forward with unstoppable momentum. The lion's massive paws struck David between the shoulder blades, driving him face first into the hard-packed earth. Before he could roll over or attempt to defend himself, The lion's jaws clamped down on his skull with crushing force. The predator's canine teeth, each over 2 inches long, punched through bone and brain tissue with sickening ease. David's body convulsed once as his spinal cord severed, then went completely limp. The lion maintained his grip for several seconds, shaking his massive head to ensure the kill, before releasing his victim and stepping back. Blood pooled rapidly in the dust beneath David's motionless form as the lion stood over him, panting heavily from the brief but explosive exertion. Other tourists in the area had heard David's brief scream and immediately radioed park rangers. A response team arrived within 15 minutes, but there was nothing they could do except secure the scene and wait for the lion to move away from the body. It took nearly an hour before the predator finally lost interest and wandered back toward his pride. David was pronounced dead at the scene, his skull crushed beyond recognition and his cervical spine completely severed. The investigation revealed that he had violated multiple park safety regulations by leaving his vehicle and approaching a wild lion on foot. Kruger National Park faced no liability, but officials used the incident to reinforce safety briefings for all visitors. David's camera, found near his body, contained the last 2 photographs he'd ever taken, stunning close-up images of the lion that killed them. His family chose not to publish them. The coffee table book project was quietly abandoned, and David's existing portfolio was donated to a wildlife conservation organization.
It was March 8, 2016, and the sun hung low over the Okavango Delta. Hannah Mulenga adjusted her waterproof camera housing, pressing her thumb along the rubber seal one last time before wading deeper into the murky shallows. The water was tea-dark from tannins, opaque enough that her calves disappeared within inches. Hannah was 27 years old, a photography enthusiast from Lusaka, Zambia, known among local wildlife circles for her fearless approach to documenting animal behavior. She worked part-time for a conservation NGO, producing stills used in school programs and visitor briefings. She favored eye-level shots that placed the viewer inside the animal's space, rather than observing from a distance. Colleagues often joked that Hannah would wade through anything for the perfect frame, a comment delivered half in admiration and half in concern. Over 3 years, she had photographed hippos along rivers and floodplains across southern Africa. That confidence had grown gradually, and to her mind, responsibly. She had never been injured, never charged, never forced to abandon a shoot because of fear. Each successful session reinforced the last. What she had not fully accounted for were the risks posed by other predators that shared those same waterways. Nile crocodiles are among the most formidable predators on the continent. Adults can reach lengths of up to 18 feet and weigh more than 1,600 pounds, with a bite force measured in the thousands of pounds per square inch. Capable of crushing bone and tearing muscle with minimal effort. Built for ambush, they can remain motionless for hours. When they strike, they do so with explosive speed, lunging forward in bursts that can reach approximately 22 miles per hour in water. Movement and vibration trigger their prey response. To a crocodile, a wading antelope, a splashing bird, or a human knee-deep in a channel registers the same. That afternoon, Hannah's guide, a local man named Tumalo, had warned her repeatedly about entering the water. He had pointed out specific channels where crocodiles had been seen earlier that morning, noting the slide marks on muddy banks and the faint ripples that suggested submerged bodies. Hannah listened, nodded, and acknowledged his experience. But he said that she maintained that the angle from shore flattened the animals and removed the sense of scale she needed. She told him she had waded before, many times, and knew how to read water for danger signs. Tumelo did not argue further, but he remained uneasy as he watched her step off the bank. From roughly 30 yards away, Tumelo observed Hannah progress deeper into the channel. The water rose from her ankles to her knees, rippling around her legs as she moved slowly to avoid startling the hippos. They were clustered on the far bank, an estimated 50 to 70 feet away, their broad backs breaking the surface in a loose line. The hippos were close enough to dominate the scene visually, but not close enough to deter a crocodile concealed along the reed line where Hannah waded. Another group of hippos lingered farther ahead, half submerged and apparently indifferent to her presence. Hannah stopped, adjusted her stance, and then knelt to stabilize her shot, lowering her center of gravity and bracing her elbows against her thighs. The attack came without warning. There was no visible disturbance beforehand, no ripple or shadow to signal what was beneath her. The surface erupted as the crocodile launched upward, its massive jaws clamping onto Hannah's right thigh with crushing force. The impact knocked her sideways, twisting her torso as she fell. Her camera remained clutched in both hands as her brain struggled to register what had happened. Tumalo heard her scream, a sharp, brief sound that cut across the channel. He ran to the bank, shouting into his radio to alert the camp emergency net, and grabbed a long pole and a throw rope. He edged into the shallows but stopped short when the water exploded again in front of him. Recognizing the danger, he backed away and called for the boat rather than entering the water himself. The crocodile, later estimated at approximately 14 feet in length, immediately employed its signature death roll. Underwater, it spun with violent speed, using rotational force to tear through muscle and compromise bone. Hannah's femur fractured in multiple places, the jagged breaks consistent with torsional stress. Her pelvis dislocated as the animal twisted. Its teeth sunk nearly 4 inches into her flesh. Mud and blood clouded the water. She surfaced once, gasping and thrashing, her movements frantic and uncoordinated. It was the only time she broke the surface after the initial strike. Rangers from a nearby anti-poaching patrol, already navigating an adjacent channel less than 3 kilometers away, arrived roughly 12 minutes after Tumelo's call. They brought poles and firearms, spreading out along the bank and scanning the water. By the time they reached the site, there was nothing visible except Hannah's backpack, which had snagged on a cluster of submerged papyrus roots approximately 20 feet from where the attack had occurred. The channel had returned to a deceptive calm, the surface smooth and dark, offering no immediate indication of the violence it had concealed moments earlier. The hippos had shifted position, but remained in the area, their presence lending an unsettling normalcy to the scene. Recovery efforts began immediately, but were complicated by the maze-like network of channels and reed beds that defined the delta. Rangers searched until nightfall and resumed at first light. Hannah's body was located the following morning, partially submerged in reeds roughly 200 yards downstream from the attack site. The coroner's report documented massive trauma to the right leg and pelvis, with fractures and tissue damage consistent with extreme rotational force. The official cause of death was listed as drowning following catastrophic blood loss and shock from the initial attack. In the days that followed, wildlife officials noted an increase in crocodile encounters linked to drought conditions that were pushing animals and people into the same shrinking water sources. Access routes narrowed, and predators accustomed to ambushing wildlife found humans entering areas that had once been avoided. Hannah's camera equipment was recovered and returned to her family in Lusaka. The memory cards were intact, containing images from earlier in the day, quiet frames of water and hippos taken before she entered the channel. It was September 28, 2017, and the crystal-clear channels of the Okavango Delta reflected the African sky like mirrors, their pristine waters hiding some of the continent's most dangerous predators beneath their deceptively peaceful surface. Dr. James Mitchell had been living at his remote research station for 6 months, studying hippo behavior patterns in one of the world's most pristine wetland ecosystems. The isolation and intimate access to wildlife represented the opportunity of a lifetime for the marine biologist turned conservationist. Dr. James Mitchell had dedicated his career to understanding aquatic ecosystems, earning his PhD in marine biology before transitioning to African wildlife conservation. At 35, he was considered one of the leading experts on hippo behavior, but his passion for his work had led him to take increasingly risky approaches to data collection. His research station was located in one of the most remote sections of the Delta, accessible only by boat and staffed by just James and a single research assistant. James had been documenting the daily movement patterns of a local hippopod, tracking their feeding routes and territorial behaviors to better understand their impact on the Delta's ecosystem. His work required him to collect water samples and observe the animals at close range, often working alone when his assistant was occupied with other research tasks. That morning, James had planned to collect water samples from a narrow channel that the hippos used as a highway between their daytime resting areas and nighttime feeding grounds. He had observed their patterns for months and believed he understood their schedule well enough to work safely in the area during what he considered low-risk periods. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for more human deaths than any other large mammal on the continent. Adult bulls can weigh over 4,000 pounds and are capable of running at speeds up to 30 miles per hour both on land and in water. Their massive jaws can open to 150 degrees and deliver bite forces exceeding 1,800 pounds per square inch, easily capable of crushing a human body or biting a canoe in half. Hippos are highly territorial and become extremely aggressive during mating season or when protecting their young. James waded into the channel carrying his water sampling equipment, confident that the hippos were all resting on land during the heat of the day. The water was chest deep in the center of the channel, but James had worked in similar conditions dozens of times without incident. What he didn't know was that a large territorial bull had recently moved into the area and was resting submerged in the deeper water just upstream from his sampling location. The massive hippo had been aware of James's presence from the moment he entered the water, but had remained motionless in the murky depths while assessing the threat. Hippos can hold their breath for up to 5 minutes and often rest completely submerged during the day, making them nearly invisible to humans working in the water above them. As James moved deeper into the channel to reach the optimal sampling location, he unknowingly entered the hippo's territorial zone. The 3,500-pound bull erupted from the water without warning, his massive bulk creating a wave that knocked James off balance before the animal's jaws could reach him. James tried to retreat toward the shore, but the hippo's speed in water made escape impossible. The massive animal's jaws clamped down on James's torso with bone-crushing force, the impact driving him underwater as the hippo's territorial aggression took over completely. The hippo's attack was prolonged and brutal, the massive animal using his enormous size and strength to ensure that the perceived threat was completely eliminated. James's research equipment scattered across the channel as the hippo continued his assault, his powerful jaws and massive weight inflicting fatal injuries that no human could survive. James's research assistant discovered his body hours later when he failed to return to the research station at the scheduled time. The investigation revealed that James had been working alone in known hippo territory during mating season, when the animal's territorial aggression was at its peak. James's death prompted a complete review of safety protocols for wildlife researchers working in aquatic environments and highlighted the extreme danger posed by hippos to humans working in their territory. His research station was relocated to a safer area, and new regulations required researchers to work in pairs when collecting samples in hippo habitat. The tragedy served as a reminder that even experienced wildlife researchers could fall victim to the unpredictable nature of African animals, and that familiarity with wildlife behavior was no guarantee of safety when working in close proximity to dangerous species. March 22, 2015 brought perfect weather to South Africa's Kruger National Park. For a 31-year-old freelance filmmaker, Anthony Smith from Manchester, this was the opportunity that would make or break his career. He'd convinced his production company to fund this research trip, believing that ground-level footage would set their elephant documentary apart from anything else on the market. Anthony was passionate about his craft, having spent 2 years working on nature documentaries across Europe. But this was his first major assignment in Africa, and he carried professional-grade equipment worth over 15,000 pounds. His goal was simple but dangerous: capture intimate elephant behavior that could only be observed on foot, footage that would establish his reputation in the competitive world of wildlife cinematography. The walking safari group consisted of 8 tourists, 2 armed rangers, and a local tracker who knew the ancient elephant paths like the back of his hand. They'd been following fresh elephant tracks for over 2 hours, moving quietly through dense woodland where massive bulls often sought shade during the hottest part of the day. During the pre-dawn briefing, the lead ranger had been crystal clear about the protocols. Elephants pose the greatest danger to humans in the African wilderness. He'd specifically warned about the unpredictable nature of solitary bull elephants and stressed the absolute importance of maintaining silence and stillness when observing these giants. African elephants are the largest land mammals on Earth. Adult bulls can weigh up to 13,000 pounds and stand over 13 feet tall at the shoulder. They possess incredible intelligence and complex social structures, but solitary bulls can be extremely unpredictable and aggressive. Their hearing is so acute, they can detect vibrations through their feet from miles away, making them highly sensitive to any unusual sounds or movements. When an elephant decides you're a threat, you have seconds to live. The tracker spotted a massive bull elephant feeding approximately 50 meters ahead, partially hidden behind a cluster of trees. The lead ranger instructed everyone to remain absolutely silent and motionless while they observed the magnificent animal from what he considered a safe distance. Anthony had been recording continuously with his handheld camera, documenting the group's approach and the elephant's peaceful feeding behavior. But against the ranger's explicit instructions, he made a decision that would cost him his life. He began moving a few steps closer to get a better angle, driven by his ambition to capture footage that would make his career. That's when disaster struck with devastating speed. As he repositioned himself, his heavy camera equipment caught on a low branch. He stumbled, dropping his backup battery pack, which hit the ground with a loud thud that echoed through the quiet woodland like a gunshot. The massive elephant was startled by the sudden, unexpected noise echoing through the peaceful woodland. His enormous ears spread wide as he searched for the source of the disturbance. His ability to detect ground vibrations and capture low-frequency sound made him acutely aware of the threat. What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed that left everyone helpless to intervene. The elephant began his first charge, a thunderous bluff charge designed to intimidate and assess the threat level. His massive feet pounded the ground as he covered half the distance before stopping abruptly, trunk raised, testing the air. The rangers immediately began shouting commands, trying to move the group to safety while preparing their weapons. But when the group failed to retreat and the perceived threat remained, the bull elephant committed to a full charge, determined to eliminate what he now saw as a serious danger to his territory. Other tourists managed to capture limited footage of the chaotic moments as the attack began, the massive form thundering toward them, people screaming and scattering in pure terror. The camera was able to capture the initial attack of the elephant before the footage becomes completely disoriented as panic takes over, and you can hear the deafening sound of 6 tons of enraged elephants bearing down on the group. The bull elephant's massive body slammed into Anthony with devastating force. The impact knocked him unconscious instantly. The elephant's massive front foot came down on his chest and abdomen, causing catastrophic internal trauma before the animal moved away, satisfied that the threat had been eliminated. The rangers fired warning shots to drive the elephant back, but it was already too late. Anthony never regained consciousness, dying from massive internal injuries within moments of the attack. The investigation revealed that Anthony had violated fundamental walking safari protocols by leaving his designated position and making noise that attracted the elephant's attention. The limited footage captured by other group members was reviewed as evidence and led to the safari company implementing stricter guidelines, requiring tourists to sign additional waivers, acknowledging the extreme risks of ground-level wildlife encounters. Anthony's production company used the incident to develop enhanced safety training for crews working with dangerous wildlife, but his death served as a brutal reminder that in the African wilderness, one mistake can be your last. The other members of the walking safari group were so traumatized by witnessing the attack that several required psychological counseling upon returning home. It was July 14th, 2018, the winter sun hanging low over the Free State grasslands of South Africa, when Leonid Baran made the fatal mistake of transforming himself from part of a large, non-threatening vehicle into a separate, vulnerable target in the eyes of a protective mother. The 18-year-old exchange student had arrived in South Africa just 6 weeks earlier as part of a summer exchange program through his community college in Riverside, California. He had enrolled in the program impulsively, encouraged by friends and family who saw it as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity before transferring to a 4-year school. His host family described him as enthusiastic and impulsive, the kind of young man who acted before thinking but without malicious intent. This safari, organized through his exchange program, was meant to be the highlight of his stay abroad, a chance to see Africa's famous wildlife up close before returning home at the end of summer. The open-sided Land Rover had stopped on a dirt road cutting through knee-high grass speckled with acacia shrubs. The vehicle was one of several used by the lodge, modified with raised seats and metal side panels designed to provide a physical barrier between tourists and wildlife. There were no doors, only open gaps above the panels, and guests were expected to remain seated with their bodies fully inside the frame at all times. The road itself was little more than a pair of worn tracks pressed into the soil by years of safari traffic, bordered closely by brush that could easily conceal large animals. Earlier that morning, the guide had delivered the standard safety briefing at the lodge. He emphasized that guests must remain seated at all times and never extend arms or legs outside the vehicle. He explained that predators often interpreted sudden movement as a threat or opportunity, and that the vehicle's silhouette provided protection by making humans appear as part of a single, large, non-prey object. He specifically warned that lions with cubs were active in this sector of the reserve and were known to be highly defensive. African lionesses are the primary hunters of a pride, weighing roughly 260 to 400 pounds and capable of killing prey several times their own size. Their bite force, estimated around 650 pounds per square inch, is sufficient to crush vertebrae or collapse a windpipe. Highly defensive of cubs, maternal lionesses are among Africa's most unpredictable and dangerous animals. They can sprint up to about 35 miles per hour over short distances, covering ground far faster than a human can react, and attacks often occur with little to no visible warning. Critically, lions rely heavily on visual cues to assess threats, identifying potential dangers by size, movement patterns, and silhouette recognition. When the vehicle rounded a gentle bend and the guide spotted 3 lion cubs playing near a roadside bush approximately 20 feet away, he immediately cut the engine. He raised one hand and quietly instructed everyone to remain still and quiet. The cubs, probably around 4 months old and still displaying the faint spotted coats of youth, rolled and pounced on each other in the dappled shade. Their presence suggested that the mother was nearby, likely resting in thicker cover just out of sight, watching the large green vehicle that her instincts registered as a single, non-threatening object. For several minutes, the tourist took photographs, whispering excitedly as camera shutters clicked. Then Leonid reached into his day pack to swap his camera lens, his movements becoming hurried and expansive. The guide noticed and told him firmly to remain still, but Leonid, distracted by the cub's proximity, shifted his weight to the very edge of his seat. What happened next was a direct result of a fundamental failure in silhouette discipline. As Leonid leaned out, his upper torso and camera lens broke the vertical plane of the vehicle's side panel. To the lioness, a piece of the large neutral object had suddenly detached and moved independently, transforming from a passive environmental feature into a mobile biological threat. The lioness had been monitoring the vehicle from dense cover roughly 30 feet away, her eyes tracking its movements while remaining motionless. Safari vehicles were familiar to her. They appeared regularly on this route, maintaining their shape and distance before moving on. But when Leonid's upper body broke free from the vehicle's outline, her visual processing system registered an immediate threat assessment change. What had been one large stationary object was now a large object with a smaller mobile component advancing toward her offspring. Leonid leaned out farther, extending his arm as he tried to get a closer photograph of the cubs. At that moment, he was less than 8 feet from the nearest cub, his body clearly separated from the vehicle's protective silhouette. The lioness's defensive instincts triggered instantly. The lioness emerged from the brush behind the cubs with almost no visible warning. Witnesses later said they did not see her until she was already in motion. She covered the distance to the vehicle in under 2 seconds. Leonid was still extended over the side, his camera raised, when the lioness struck him with the full force of her roughly 330-pound frame. Leonid's torso was driven backward against the metal edge of the vehicle, and then yanked forward as the lioness's jaws clamped onto his ribcage and shoulder. Her canines punctured through his shirt and skin, sinking deep into the muscle beneath. The dashcam mounted near the front of the Land Rover later captured the attack in grainy detail. The lioness braced against the vehicle, jaws locked around Leonid's upper body, pulling him over the side panel toward the ground. Leonid's legs kicked frantically as he was dragged, his body scraping over the metal edge before disappearing into the grass beside the road. Tourists screamed, their voices overlapping in panic on the audio recording. The lioness never released her grip, using her body weight and neck muscles to overpower him. Leonid's right hand came up weakly, pushing against her muzzle, but the pressure of her bite had already collapsed part of his ribcage. Blood spread rapidly across his chest and neck, soaking through his shirt in dark, irregular patches. The lioness adjusted her grip, releasing momentarily before clamping down again on Leonid's throat and upper chest. This second bite crushed his trachea and severed the carotid artery. His legs stopped moving almost immediately. Witnesses estimated the main attack sequence lasted under a minute from initial contact to the cessation of movement. The lioness began dragging his body toward heavier brush, the cubs scattering into the grass as she moved. After perhaps 10 feet, she released him and retreated quickly, responding to the sound of the engine as the guide restarted the vehicle and repositioned it to create distance. The guide radioed the park ranger station immediately, his voice strained but controlled as he reported a fatal mauling. Rangers from the nearest post arrived 14 minutes later, armed and prepared to tranquilize or, if necessary, shoot the lioness. She was no longer visible, having moved deeper into cover with her cubs. Leonid lay in the grass about 15 feet from the road, his body motionless. Rangers confirmed there was no pulse and extensive visible trauma to the chest and throat. The coroner's report later documented that death resulted from rapid exsanguination and asphyxiation due to massive bite trauma. The remaining tourists were escorted back to the lodge in silence. Statements were taken, dashcam footage was secured, and Leonid's belongings were collected from the vehicle. His family was notified later that day through the U.S. Embassy. The lioness and her cubs were monitored in the following weeks, but were not relocated or destroyed. Officials concluded that she had responded naturally to a perceived threat to her young, and that the incident was the result of clear safety violations. The summer of August 15, 2017 brought perfect safari conditions to Kenya's Masai Mara. Golden grasslands stretched endlessly under the scorching sun. And for Helen Rodriguez, a 42-year-old high school principal from Phoenix, this wasn't just another vacation. This was the dream trip she and her husband had saved 3 years to afford. Helen and her husband were celebrating their 20th wedding anniversary, and he was determined to document every moment with his handheld video camera. They were the perfect couple for an African adventure, both nature enthusiasts who had spent months planning this once-in-a-lifetime safari experience. What her husband captured on camera that day would become evidence in a tragic investigation. Their experienced guide had positioned the vehicle about 30 meters from a pride of lions resting under an acacia tree. He'd been leading safaris for 15 years and knew the perfect distance for photography while maintaining safety. But even the most experienced guides can't control human behavior when the desire for the perfect shot takes over. African lions are apex predators that can weigh up to 420 pounds and reach speeds of 35 miles per hour. Male lions are particularly territorial and aggressive, especially when protecting their pride. Their powerful jaws deliver a bite force of over 650 pounds per square inch, while their razor-sharp claws can grow up to 3 inches long. Helen had been taking photos from her seated position when she noticed her husband struggling to get clear shots over the vehicle's side panels. Despite the guide's repeated warnings that passengers must remain seated at all times, Helen made a decision that would cost her everything. She slowly stood up, gripping the roll bar for support, positioning herself for what she believed would be the perfect anniversary photo. The guide immediately began speaking firmly, telling her to sit down, but Helen was already leaning over the vehicle's side, lost in the excitement of capturing the African wilderness behind her. Her husband kept filming, completely unaware that he was about to document the most horrific moment of his life. That's when everything went catastrophically wrong. The footage shows the big male lion suddenly looking up at Helen's movement and the sound of her shifting position. The massive cat rose to his feet, ears forward, alert to this unusual disturbance. Helen finally realized something was wrong and panicked, accidentally stepping backward and losing her footing on the vehicle's edge. She tumbled out of the safari vehicle, landing hard on the ground with a loud thud just meters from the now alert lion. The sudden noise and movement startled the lion, triggering its defensive instinct. He charged the remaining distance in seconds. The camera captured the moment of impact as the massive predator launched himself at Helen, but then the footage became pure chaos, shaking violently as her panicked husband forgot he was still recording. Through the disoriented footage, you can hear the guide desperately revving the engine and honking the horn. The guide followed proper protocol, slowly driving the vehicle toward the lion while making as much noise as possible to intimidate the predator. The loud commotion caused the lion to disengage and retreat toward his pride, but the damage was already done. A medical helicopter was dispatched from the nearest airstrip and arrived within 40 minutes. Helen was airlifted to Nairobi Hospital in critical condition, but despite emergency surgery to repair extensive injuries to her neck and shoulders, she succumbed to massive blood loss and trauma-related complications 6 hours after the attack. Investigation revealed that Helen had violated multiple safety protocols by standing in the vehicle and leaning outside its protective boundaries. The footage from her husband's camera provided clear evidence of the sequence of events and was reviewed by investigators as part of their incident analysis. The couple's anniversary celebration became a nightmare that would haunt the surviving husband forever. The footage he had intended as a happy memory became evidence in a tragic investigation that would be used in training programs for safari operators. It was April 3, 2014, and the dense bushveld of Kruger National Park provided perfect cover for the predators that ruled this ancient ecosystem. Elena Rodriguez had been tracking a female leopard for 3 days, following the elusive cat through terrain that few tourists ever experienced. The Spanish photographer had finally located her quarry, resting in a massive marula tree with her 2 young cubs, presenting the exact opportunity she had been hired to capture. Elena Rodriguez had built her reputation photographing wildlife in the mountains of Spain, but African assignments represented a significant step up in both prestige and danger. At 27, she was determined to establish herself as a serious wildlife photographer, taking on increasingly challenging assignments that other photographers avoided. The Nature magazine that had commissioned her leopard photos was paying well, but they expected images that would stand out from the thousands of generic safari shots flooding the market. Elena had been working alone for most of her 3-week assignment, believing that solo work allowed her to get closer to animals without the noise and distraction of guides or other photographers. Her experience with European wildlife had given her confidence, but nothing had prepared her for the territorial aggression and protective instincts of African predators defending their young. That afternoon, Elena had positioned herself about 50 meters from the tree where the leopard family was resting, using a telephoto lens to capture images of the cubs playing while their mother watched vigilantly. The shots were good, but Elena knew they lacked the dramatic impact that would make them magazine-worthy. Leopards are solitary, territorial predators known for their incredible climbing ability and fierce protection of their young. Adult females typically weigh between 60 and 130 pounds, but possess strength far exceeding their size, capable of dragging prey twice their weight up into trees. Mother leopards with cubs are particularly dangerous, as they will attack any perceived threat to their offspring with devastating ferocity. Elena noticed a large sausage tree about 30 meters from the leopard's resting spot that would provide an elevated angle for more dramatic shots. The tree's thick branches and sturdy trunk made it appear safe to climb, and Elena reasoned that the height advantage would allow her to capture unique images while maintaining a respectful distance from the leopard family. What Elena failed to realize was that her chosen tree was positioned directly above the leopard's primary escape route, the path the mother would use to move her cubs to safety if threatened. By climbing the tree, Elena had unknowingly blocked the leopard's exit strategy and positioned herself as a direct threat to the family's security. As Elena reached a height of about 15 feet and began setting up her camera equipment, the mother leopard's behavior changed dramatically. The cat's ears flattened against her head, and she began making low, growling sounds while positioning herself between her cubs and Elena's location. The leopard's attack came without further warning, the powerful cat launching herself from her resting branch with explosive force. The mother leopard covered the distance to Elena's tree in seconds, her claws finding purchase on the bark as she climbed toward the perceived threat. The leopard struck Elena with devastating force, her powerful claws raking across the photographer's back and shoulders, while her jaws clamped down on Elena's neck and head. The impact of the attack caused Elena to lose her grip on the tree, and both she and the leopard fell toward the ground in a tangle of claws, teeth, and camera equipment. Elena hit the ground hard, her camera gear scattering across the rocky soil as the leopard continued her attack. The cat's maternal instincts drove her to eliminate the threat completely, her powerful jaws inflicting massive trauma to Elena's head and neck, while her claws opened deep wounds across her torso and limbs. Elena's struggles grew weaker as blood loss and trauma overwhelmed her system, her body unable to withstand the leopard's relentless assault. The remote location meant that no help was available, and Elena died from her injuries within minutes of the initial attack. Elena's body was discovered 2 days later by park rangers who had been alerted when she failed to check in at her scheduled time. Her camera equipment was found scattered around the attack site, with her final images showing the leopard's increasing agitation before the fatal encounter. The investigation revealed that Elena had violated park regulations by working alone in dangerous areas and approaching too close to wildlife with young. Her death prompted stricter enforcement of safety protocols for photographers working in national parks and highlighted the extreme dangers posed by protective mother leopards. Elena's tragic death served as a reminder that even experienced wildlife photographers could fall victim to the unpredictable nature of African predators, particularly when maternal instincts were involved. Her story became a cautionary tale shared among wildlife photographers about the importance of understanding animal behavior and maintaining safe distances. June 8, 2016 brought another spectacular evening to the luxury Chobe Safari Lodge in Botswana. For a 29-year-old software engineer, Ben Harold from Seattle, this elevated riverside deck represented everything he dreamed about during 2 years of saving for his solo African adventure. Ben was a successful tech worker who had built his passion for videography during weekend trips to the Pacific Northwest. He'd brought thousands of dollars worth of filming equipment to document his African adventure, and the lodge's marketing materials had specifically highlighted the safety and comfort of their hippo viewing experience, a deciding factor in his booking. The evening hippo viewing had become legendary among safari enthusiasts. The elevated wooden deck extended directly over the Chobe River, providing guests with an unobstructed view of the massive animals as they emerged from the water for their nightly feeding. The deck was positioned 15 feet above the river and had been used safely for years, though recent heavy rains had caused some minor structural stress to certain sections. Hippopotamuses are among Africa's most dangerous animals, responsible for more human deaths than any other large mammal on the continent. Adult bulls can weigh up to 4,000 pounds and reach speeds of 30 miles per hour on land. Their massive jaws can open to 150 degrees and deliver a bite force exceeding 1,800 pounds per square inch. Their canine teeth can grow up to 20 inches long and are razor sharp, capable of crushing bones like twigs. Ben had been filming the hippos for over an hour as they grazed along the riverbank directly below the deck. He operated his handheld video camera continuously, documenting the incredible wildlife spectacle unfolding beneath him. He felt completely secure on the elevated platform, believing that the height provided absolute protection from the massive animals below. As the evening progressed, he became increasingly ambitious with his filming, leaning far over the deck's railing to capture dramatic downward angles of the feeding hippos. The lodge staff had warned guests to remain seated and avoid sudden movements, but his enthusiasm for the perfect footage gradually overcame his caution. That's when everything went catastrophically wrong. Ben leaned even further over the railing, trying to get closer footage of the hippos below, when he overbalanced and the wooden railing gave way under the stress. The combination of his weight and awkward positioning caused the already weakened section to fail completely. He plummeted 15 feet into the river water, about 5 feet deep, directly beside a massive bull hippo, still gripping his waterproof camera as he hit the water with a tremendous splash. The disturbance in the water immediately caught the attention of the 3,500-pound bull hippo, but instead of attacking immediately, the massive animal did what hippos typically do when startled. He submerged, disappearing beneath the murky water while Ben struggled to orient himself in the river. For a terrifying moment, everything was silent, except for the man's panicked splashing as he tried to reach the riverbank. Lodge staff above began shouting emergency procedures, but they were powerless to help from their position 15 feet above. Then the hippo resurfaced with deadly intent. The massive animal had repositioned himself underwater and emerged directly beside the struggling man. The bull hippo's territorial instincts kicked in as he identified this thrashing intruder as a threat that needed to be eliminated immediately. His massive jaws opened wide, revealing those deadly canine teeth. The victim's camera captured the first few seconds of the attack, the hippo's massive jaws opening wide and lunging toward him, before the camera was released from his grip during the violent encounter, sinking beneath the surface and continuing to record nothing but dark, muddy water. The attack was swift and absolutely devastating. The hippo's jaws clamped down on Ben's torso with bone-crushing force, his massive canine teeth puncturing through the man's chest and abdomen. The bite force instantly fractured ribs and punctured vital organs as the hippo's powerful neck muscles crushed him violently like a heavy machinery. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds, but the hippo's incredible bite force and the man's injuries from the fall ensured that the encounter would be fatal. Ben died from massive internal trauma and blood loss before emergency medical personnel could reach the remote lodge location. The investigation revealed that recent heavy rains had caused some structural stress to that section of the deck. Though regular inspections had not identified it as an immediate safety concern, the official cause of death was listed as massive internal trauma and organ damage caused by hippo attack, compounded by injuries from the 15-foot fall. Ben's death led to immediate safety upgrades at the lodge, including reinforced railings and stricter guest safety protocols. The incident prompted enhanced structural inspection requirements at wildlife viewing facilities throughout Botswana, ensuring that the tragedy would lead to improved safety measures for future visitors. It was July 15, 2016, and the vast plains of Serengeti National Park stretched endlessly under the African stars, their ancient rhythms undisturbed by the modern world beyond its borders. The Patterson family's campsite sat in a remote section of the park, far from the luxury lodges and established tourist routes. Michael and Sarah Patterson had chosen this budget safari operator specifically for its promise of authentic wilderness experiences, believing their daughters Emma and Sophie would benefit from sleeping under the real African sky rather than behind the walls of expensive accommodations. Michael Patterson had been planning this trip for 2 years, working overtime at his accounting firm in Columbus, Ohio, while Sarah picked up extra nursing shifts at the local hospital. At 32, Michael was determined to give his family an adventure that would create lasting memories, even if it meant cutting corners on luxury to afford the experience. Sarah, 29, had initially been hesitant about bringing their young daughters on such an adventurous trip, but Michael's enthusiasm had eventually won her over. The family had been in Tanzania for 4 days, and the girls were already enchanted by the wildlife they had seen during their game drives. 6-year-old Emma had filled a notebook with drawings of zebras and giraffes, while 4-year-old Sophie collected interesting rocks and leaves that their guide had said were safe to touch. The budget tour operator had provided basic camping equipment and a guide who managed multiple groups simultaneously, often leaving families unsupervised for hours at a time. That evening, the family had set up their tent in an area that their guide had assured them was safe, though he had mentioned almost casually that lions sometimes passed through the region during their nightly hunts. The campsite lacked the electric fencing and elevated platforms that more expensive operators used, relying instead on a basic perimeter of rope and small solar lights that were supposed to deter wildlife. African lions are apex predators that hunt primarily at night, using coordinated pack strategies to take down prey much larger than themselves. Adult males can weigh up to 420 pounds, while females are typically smaller but more agile hunters. Lions have excellent night vision and acute hearing, making them perfectly adapted for nocturnal hunting. Prides often work together during attacks, with different members taking specific roles to ensure successful kills. Around 10 p.m., Michael noticed that their tent's main zipper had broken, leaving a gap of several inches that couldn't be properly closed. Sarah suggested they ask their guide for help, but Michael was reluctant to wake the man who had been managing 3 different campsites and seemed exhausted. Instead, Michael decided to attempt a temporary repair using the small sewing kit that Sarah had packed for emergencies. Michael worked by flashlight while Sarah and the girls tried to sleep, but the repair proved more difficult than expected. The tent's fabric was thick, and the broken zipper teeth were jammed, requiring him to cut away damaged sections and attempt to create a makeshift closure using safety pins and cord. A pride of 5 lions had been hunting in the area and had detected the unusual activity at the human camp. The broken tent, the moving light, and the unfamiliar sounds had drawn their curiosity, and they began approaching the campsite with the stealth that made them such effective predators. Around 3 a.m., Michael was still working on the tent repair when he heard a low growling sound just outside the fabric walls. He froze, his flashlight beam wavering, as he tried to determine the source of the noise. The growling grew louder and was joined by additional sounds that suggested multiple animals were surrounding their tent. The first lion pushed through the gap in the broken zipper, its massive head and shoulders forcing the opening wider as it entered the confined space of the tent. Michael grabbed the flashlight and tried to use it to drive the animal back, but the lion's predatory instincts had been fully triggered by the scent and sounds of the trapped humans. Sarah screamed as the lion's jaws clamped down on Michael's arm, the powerful bite crushing bone and tearing through muscle tissue. The sound woke Emma and Sophie, who began crying as they witnessed their father being attacked by the massive predator. Sarah tried to shield her daughters while calling for help, but their remote location meant no assistance was available. A second lion entered the tent through the widened opening, followed quickly by a third. The confined space became a death trap as the pride's coordinated hunting instincts took over. Michael's attempts to fight back were futile against the lion's superior strength and natural weapons, his injuries from the first attack leaving him unable to effectively protect his family. The lion's attack was swift and methodical, their natural hunting behaviors adapted perfectly for taking down multiple prey in a confined space. Emma and Sophie's cries were cut short as the pride's attack continued, the lion's powerful jaws and claws inflicting fatal injuries on all 4 family members within minutes. The guide discovered the scene at dawn when he arrived to check on the family's campsite. The lions had departed hours earlier, leaving behind a scene of devastation that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Emergency services were called, but all 4 family members had died from massive trauma inflicted during the coordinated attack. The investigation revealed multiple safety violations by the tour operator, including inadequate campsite security, insufficient guide supervision, and failure to provide proper safety equipment. The company's permits were revoked, and new regulations were implemented requiring electric fencing and armed guards at all camping sites in predator areas. The Patterson family's deaths sent shockwaves through the safari tourism industry and prompted their extended family to advocate for stricter safety standards for budget tour operators. The tragedy highlighted the deadly consequences of cutting corners on safety measures in one of the world's most dangerous environments. October 12, 2014 was the perfect conditions for South Africa's exclusive Sabi Sands Game Reserve. For a 38-year-old semi-professional photographer, Sarah Jane from Dublin, this specialized photo hide program represented the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to capture intimate leopard behavior that would establish her reputation among the world's top wildlife photographers. Sarah had been building her portfolio for nature magazines for over 8 years, specializing in wildlife subjects that she sold to publications. This South African assignment represented her most ambitious project yet, and she'd paid premium rates for what she believed would be the safest way to photograph one of Africa's most secretive predators. The hide was equipped with professional camera mounts and had been used safely by hundreds of photographers over the past decade. Constructed of natural materials and positioned just 10 meters from a waterhole, it provided unprecedented close-up opportunities while remaining completely concealed from wildlife. The reserve required all photographers to maintain radio contact with the main lodge, checking in every hour for safety purposes. She had also placed a video camera on a tripod outside the hide, positioned to film her photography session and capture the leopard's behavior from a different angle. The external camera would provide valuable footage of her work process and create a comprehensive documentary of her experience. African leopards are solitary, nocturnal predators that can weigh up to 200 pounds and are considered pound for pound the strongest of the big cats. They are exceptional climbers with incredible stealth and speed, able to accelerate from 0 to 36 miles per hour in seconds. Their bite force exceeds 400 pounds per square inch, while their retractable claws can grow up to 2 inches long and are razor sharp for gripping prey. A magnificent male leopard had approached the waterhole just as she'd hoped, moving with the fluid grace that made these cats such compelling photographic subjects. She began capturing frame after frame as the leopard drank, while her external video camera continued filming the entire encounter. The leopard finished drinking and began moving around the waterhole, his keen senses detecting something unusual about the photography hide. Male leopards are extremely territorial and investigate any changes in their environment with suspicious aggression. Sarah continued shooting as the leopard moved around the area, but suddenly the big cat disappeared from her view, vanishing into the dense vegetation with the silent stealth that made leopards such effective hunters. She waited patiently for several minutes, hoping the leopard would reappear for more shots. When her scheduled radio check-in time arrived, she made a decision that would cost her everything. She ignored the protocol, so focused on the potential for the perfect shot that she didn't want to risk the radio static scaring away the leopard if it returned. The lodge staff tried to reach her twice more over the next hour, but she had turned her radio volume down to avoid any noise. Concerned that her external video camera might have stopped recording or shifted position, Sarah made the fatal decision to leave the safety of the hide to check her equipment. She had been assured that the hide was completely safe and that leopards typically moved away from the area once they finished drinking. She quietly opened the hide's entrance and stepped outside to adjust her video camera, which appeared to have shifted slightly on its tripod. She was focused entirely on repositioning the camera when the leopard, who had been resting in nearby vegetation, detected her scent and movement through his acute senses. The 180-pound leopard launched his attack from less than 10 feet away, using his natural ambush hunting instincts to strike with explosive force. Sarah had no warning as the big cat's powerful legs propelled him through the air, claws extended and jaws open wide. The leopard's claws raked across her back and shoulders, opening deep gashes while his powerful jaws sought purchase on her neck. Her screams echoed across the waterhole, but she was alone and miles from any assistance. The attack was swift and methodical, the leopard's natural hunting instincts driving him to eliminate this perceived threat to his territory. Sarah's movements ceased within seconds as the leopard's swift and methodical assault overwhelmed her system. The big cat remained with her body for several minutes, his territorial instincts satisfied, before disappearing into the gathering darkness. When Sarah failed to respond to multiple radio calls, lodge staff immediately dispatched a search team. They discovered her remains the following morning. Her external video camera had captured the initial moments when she left the hide, but the footage became chaotic once the attack began, showing only brief glimpses of movement before the camera was knocked over. The investigation revealed that Sarah had violated safety protocols by leaving the hide during an active leopard encounter and ignoring mandatory radio check-ins. Her death led to immediate safety upgrades at photography hides throughout the reserve, including mandatory GPS tracking devices and automatic emergency alerts when radio protocols are violated. Sarah's tragic end became part of enhanced safety training programs, showing both the stealth capabilities of these apex predators and the deadly consequences of breaking established safety protocols. Her family used the investigation findings to advocate for stricter safety measures at wildlife photography facilities across Africa. Her camera equipment, found scattered around the waterhole, contained over 200 images from that final session, a portfolio that would never be completed.
It was August 7th, 2015, and the sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon over Kenya's Masai Mara, painting endless grasslands in shade of golden amber. The luxury safari lodge, where Sarah and Mark Mitchell were staying, sat on a slight rise overlooking the Mara River, offering a civilized oasis in one of Africa's most dangerous wilderness areas. Sarah Mitchell was 28 and living her childhood dream. As an elementary school teacher from Oregon, she'd spent years saving every spare dollar for this honeymoon safari, filling scrapbooks with pictures of African animals and reading everything about the continent's wildlife. She'd married Mark just 2 weeks earlier, and this trip represented the adventure of a lifetime. The couple had been at the lodge for 3 days, taking guided game drives and marveling at the abundant wildlife surrounding them. Sarah had already photographed elephants, giraffes, zebras, and dozens of antelope species, but was still hoping for that perfect lion sighting. Lodge staff had assured them that short walks near camp were safe during daylight hours within designated boundaries. That evening, as the African sun began to sink toward the horizon, Sarah suggested they take a romantic walk to find a private spot for sunset photos. Mark was initially hesitant. The lodge's safety briefing had been specific about staying close to main buildings, but Sarah's enthusiasm was infectious. African lionesses are the primary hunters of their pride, using stealth, patience, and coordinated attacks to bring down prey much larger than themselves. They typically hunt during cooler hours of dawn and dusk, when their tawny coats blend perfectly with the golden grassland. A female lion can weigh up to 400 pounds and possesses night vision 6 times better than humans, making them perfectly adapted for ambush hunting in low light conditions. The couple had walked hand in hand away from the lodge's safety perimeter, following a game trail that wound through patches of tall grass and scattered acacia trees. The landscape looked peaceful in the golden light, with only the distant sounds of birds and insects breaking the silence. About a half a mile from the lodge, Sarah spotted a particularly beautiful cluster of red and yellow blooms growing near a small termite mound. She released Mark's hand and walked ahead about 50 yards to gather flowers, planning to press them in her journal as honeymoon mementos. What neither realized was that they had wandered into the hunting territory of a solitary lioness. The predator had been tracking a small herd of impala earlier and was now positioned in tall grass near the termite mound, waiting for antelope to return to the evening grazing area. Sarah knelt beside the flowers, her back to the surrounding grassland, as she carefully selected the most perfect blooms. The lioness, startled by the unexpected human presence in her hunting ground, immediately shifted focus from the absent impala to this new opportunity. Sarah's crouched position and isolated location triggered every predatory instinct the lioness possessed. The lioness began her approach with the silent precision that had made her species the apex predator of the African savanna. She moved through the grass like a golden shadow, powerful muscles coiled for the explosive burst of speed that would end the hunt. Sarah remained completely unaware, humming softly as she arranged the flowers. Mark, standing 50 yards away, was the first to spot movement in the grass behind his wife. He opened his mouth to call a warning, but the lioness was already in motion. She covered the final 20 feet in 2 powerful bounds, claws extended and jaws opened wide. The lioness struck Sarah from behind with devastating force, her 300-pound frame driving the young woman face first into the ground. Before Sarah could scream or struggle, the predator's jaws clamped down on the back of her neck, canine teeth severing the spinal cord instantly. Sarah's body went limp as her nervous system shut down, flowers scattering from lifeless fingers. Mark's horrified screams echoed across the grassland as he watched his wife die in the lioness's jaws. The predator maintained her grip for several seconds, ensuring the kill was complete before releasing Sarah's body and looking up at Mark with a blood-stained muzzle. Lodge security guards, alerted by Mark's screams, arrived within minutes with high-powered rifles and spotlights. The lioness, satisfied with her kill and showing no interest in Mark, melted back into the tall grass and disappeared. Guards found Sarah's body lying motionless beside her scattered flowers, her neck broken and life ended instantly. Emergency medical personnel confirmed Sarah had died immediately from massive trauma to her cervical spine. The investigation revealed the couple had violated lodge safety protocols by venturing beyond designated safe areas, but no criminal charges were filed. The lioness was tracked by Kenya Wildlife Service rangers over the following days and eventually relocated to a more remote area of the reserve, away from tourist facilities. Lodge management implemented stricter safety measures, including mandatory escorts for all guest activities outside the main compound. Sarah's funeral in Oregon was attended by hundreds of students, fellow teachers, and community members who remembered her infectious love of learning and adventure. Mark established a scholarship fund in her name for students pursuing careers in wildlife education, hoping her passion for animals might inspire others to study and protect them safely.
It was December 11, 2015, and the Zambezi River flowed past Victoria Falls with deceptive tranquility, its muddy waters hiding some of Africa's most dangerous predators beneath their placid surface. Kevin O'Brien had been staying at a backpacker lodge near the falls for 3 days, drinking heavily with other travelers and seeking increasingly dangerous thrills to impress his new friends. The 24-year-old Irish graduate had been traveling through Africa for 2 months, documenting his adventures on social media and constantly pushing the boundaries of acceptable risk. Kevin O'Brien had arrived in Africa fresh from university with a degree in business and a trust fund that allowed him to travel indefinitely without working. His social media accounts were filled with photos of bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, and other extreme activities, each post designed to showcase his fearlessness and adventurous spirit. Kevin's need for validation through dangerous stunts had escalated throughout his trip, with each new activity requiring greater risk to generate the same level of excitement. The Backpacker Lodge, where Kevin was staying, catered to young adventure tourists, offering cheap accommodation and easy access to extreme sports activities. The lodge's bar was a gathering place for travelers sharing stories of their exploits and daring each other to attempt increasingly dangerous feats. Kevin had quickly established himself as the most reckless member of the group, often accepting dares that other travelers considered too dangerous. That evening, Kevin had been drinking heavily with a group of fellow backpackers when the conversation turned to swimming in the Zambezi River. Local staff and experienced travelers had warned against entering the water due to the presence of Nile crocodiles, but Kevin dismissed these warnings as exaggerated attempts to control tourist behavior. Nile crocodiles are among the world's most dangerous reptiles, with adult males reaching lengths of 20 feet and weights exceeding 1,500 pounds. These apex predators are perfectly adapted for ambush hunting, capable of remaining motionless for hours while waiting for prey to approach. Their explosive attack speed and bone-crushing bite force make them responsible for hundreds of human deaths annually across Africa. Nile crocodiles are particularly dangerous in areas near tourist activities, as they often associate human presence with easy feeding opportunities. Around dawn, Kevin accepted a dare from other backpackers to swim across a section of the Zambezi known for its crocodile population. Despite warnings from lodge staff and the obvious danger of the murky water, Kevin's alcohol-impaired judgment and need to maintain his reputation for fearlessness overrode his survival instincts. Kevin entered the water at a popular fishing spot where local guides had reported recent crocodile sightings. The river appeared calm and peaceful in the early morning light, but the murky water made it impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface. Kevin began swimming toward the opposite bank, his strokes creating ripples and splashing sounds that carried far through the quiet morning air. A massive Nile crocodile, over 16 feet in length, had been hunting in the area and detected Kevin's movement in the water from several hundred meters away. The ancient predator began approaching with the patience and stealth that had made crocodiles successful hunters for millions of years, remaining completely submerged as it closed the distance to its prey. Kevin was halfway across the river when the crocodile struck, the massive reptile launching itself from the depths with explosive force. The crocodile's jaws clamped down on Kevin's leg with bone-crushing pressure, the impact driving him underwater as the predator began its signature death roll. The crocodile spun rapidly in the water, using its massive weight and powerful tail to disorient Kevin while maintaining its deadly grip. Each rotation caused additional trauma as the reptile's teeth tore through muscle and bone, while the spinning motion made it impossible for Kevin to surface for air. Kevin's screams had alerted other travelers on the riverbank, but no rescue was possible once the crocodile had seized him. The massive reptile dragged Kevin into deeper water, where the death roll continued until his struggles ceased. The entire attack lasted less than 3 minutes, but the crocodile's grip never loosened. The crocodile disappeared beneath the murky water with Kevin's body, carrying its prey toward the deeper pools where it would cache the remains until ready to feed. Kevin's backpack and clothing were found on the riverbank, but his body was never recovered despite extensive search efforts by local authorities. The investigation revealed that Kevin had ignored multiple warnings about crocodile dangers and had entered the water while intoxicated. His death prompted the lodge to implement stricter security measures and better enforcement of river safety rules. But the tragedy highlighted the deadly consequences of treating African wildlife as entertainment. Kevin's death became a cautionary tale shared among backpacker communities about the importance of respecting local warnings and the deadly reality of African predators. His social media accounts, filled with increasingly dangerous stunts, served as a reminder of how the pursuit of thrills could lead to fatal consequences. On July 4th, 2013, the weather was perfect for Tanzania's Serengeti National Park. For a successful 45-year-old accountant, Jack White, from San Francisco, celebrating Independence Day with a traditional African bush dinner seemed like the perfect way to mark both the holiday and his recent promotion. He sat around the campfire with his wife and their 2 teenage children, Kevin and Michelle, enjoying traditional Maasai dancing and storytelling under the brilliant African stars. This family vacation represented both a celebration and a long-awaited opportunity to experience African wildlife together. They were the perfect American family living their dream safari adventure, completely unaware that their 4th of July celebration was about to become a nightmare they would never forget. Kevin had been documenting their entire safari experience with the family's new digital video camera, and the bush dinner provided the perfect opportunity to capture the cultural aspects of their African adventure. The camp staff had assured all guests that the dinner location was completely secure, surrounded by electric fencing, and monitored by armed guards throughout the evening. The dinner site was positioned in a clearing approximately 2 kilometers from the main camp, chosen specifically because it offered guests an authentic bush experience while remaining within the camp's security perimeter. The area had been used safely for bush dinners for over 5 years, with multiple redundant safety systems in place. The evening had been proceeding perfectly when disaster struck without warning. A section of the electric fence had malfunctioned earlier in the day due to a power surge, though the backup systems had failed to alert maintenance staff. Through this compromised section, a massive Cape buffalo bull entered the dinner area, apparently attracted by the cooking smells and human activity. Cape buffalo are considered one of Africa's Big 5 most dangerous animals. Adult bulls can weigh up to 1,900 pounds and possess a temperament that makes them extremely unpredictable and aggressive. They have excellent memories and are known to hold grudges, sometimes tracking threats for extended periods. Their massive horns can span up to 6 feet across and are fused at the base to form a solid shield. Cape buffalo are responsible for more hunter and tourist deaths in Africa than any other species except hippos. The camp staff immediately began emergency procedures, instructing all guests to remain seated and motionless while they attempted to encourage the buffalo to leave peacefully. The armed guards took defensive positions, but were reluctant to use lethal force unless absolutely necessary, as gunfire could attract other dangerous animals and create additional chaos. The buffalo appeared calm but alert as he investigated the dinner setup, his massive bulk moving slowly through the camp chairs and tables while guests sat frozen in absolute terror. Kevin continued filming, his camera capturing the tense standoff as everyone held their breath, praying the massive animal would simply leave. That's when everything went catastrophically wrong. Against all instructions from camp staff, the jack suddenly stood up from his chair and began waving his arms at the buffalo, shouting at the massive animal to go away. Kevin's camera captured his jack's sudden movement as he stepped away from the safety of the dinner group, making the worst possible decision in the worst possible moment. The Cape buffalo had been tolerating the human presence until this moment. The jack's sudden movement and aggressive posturing triggered the animal's defensive instincts. The massive animal lowered his head, displaying his formidable horns as he identified the man as a direct threat that needed to be eliminated. The guards immediately fired warning shots into the air, but the buffalo had already committed to his charge. The massive animal thundered across the clearing with explosive speed, his hooves pounding the ground as he covered the distance in seconds. Kevin's camera shakes violently as panic overtakes him, the footage becoming chaotic and completely disoriented. Through the shaking footage, you can hear his jack's terrified screams and the thunderous sound of the buffalo's charge, but the visual becomes a blur of movement and confusion as Kevin instinctively moves to protect himself and his family. The guards fired additional shots, but the buffalo's momentum carried him forward with unstoppable force. The massive animal struck the jack with devastating impact, his horns catching the man in the chest and knocking him to the ground before trampling him with his massive hooves. More gunfire finally drove the buffalo away, and the massive animal retreated into the darkness beyond the camp perimeter. Emergency medical personnel arrived within an hour, but the jack's injuries were too severe. He died from massive internal trauma and organ failure during the helicopter evacuation to Arusha. The investigation revealed that the jack had violated all safety protocols by confronting the buffalo directly, while also uncovering the fence malfunction that had allowed the animal to enter the secure area. Kevin's footage, though chaotic and disoriented during the actual attack, provided clear evidence of the events leading up to the tragedy. The jack's death led to enhanced security measures at bush dinner locations, including redundant fence monitoring systems and stricter protocols for handling dangerous animal encounters. The family returned to San Francisco traumatized by the loss, and the incident became a sobering reminder of why safety instructions must always be followed during African wildlife encounters. The footage Kevin had captured became part of enhanced safety training, showing how quickly a peaceful wildlife encounter can turn deadly when protocols are ignored. The family's 4th of July celebration, meant to be a joyous milestone in their lives, instead became a date they would forever associate with unimaginable loss.
It was June 19, 2017, and morning mist was just beginning to lift from the Chobe River in northern Botswana. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the sounds of awakening wildlife, hippos grunting in shallows, elephants trumpeting in the distance, and the melodic calls of hundreds of bird species greeting dawn. Margaret O'Brien was 63 and finally living her dream. After 35 years of teaching high school biology in Massachusetts, she'd retired the previous year following her husband's death from cancer. The African safari had been something they planned to do together, but after Robert's passing, Maggie decided to make the journey alone as tribute to their shared love of nature. Maggie was an experienced hiker and nature enthusiast who spent countless weekends exploring New England's forests and mountains. She felt confident in her ability to read natural environments and animal behavior, though she'd never encountered anything more dangerous than black bears. The guided walking safari through Chobe seemed like the perfect way to experience African wildlife up close. Her guide Thabo was a local Botswana ranger with over 15 years of experience leading tourists through the park's diverse ecosystems. He'd given a standard safety briefing that morning: stay together, move quietly, and never separate from the group under any circumstances. African leopards are perhaps the most dangerous of the big cats, due to their stealth, strength, and unpredictable nature. Males can weigh up to 200 pounds, and are capable of dragging prey twice their size up into trees. They're solitary ambush predators with exceptional night vision and hearing, perfectly adapted for hunting in dense vegetation. Unlike lions, leopards rarely give warning before attacking, preferring to strike from concealment with explosive violence. The walking safari group consisted of 6 tourists and Thabo, moving single file along a narrow game trail that wound through dense mopane woodland. The vegetation was thick and green from recent rains, providing excellent cover for wildlife but limiting visibility to just a few yards. About 2 hours into the walk, Maggie heard what she thought was an unusual bird call coming from a thicket about 100 yards off the main trail. As a retired biology teacher, she was fascinated by African bird species and eager to add new sightings into her journal. Without thinking, she quietly slipped away from the group to investigate. Dense vegetation closed around Maggie as she pushed through the thorny branches and tangled vines, following the intermittent calls deeper into the thicket. The canopy overhead blocked most of the sunlight, creating a green twilight that made it difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. What Maggie didn't realize was that she wandered into the territory of a large male leopard who'd been resting in the same thicket after a successful hunt the night before. The big cat had dragged the remains of a small antelope up into a nearby tree and was sleeping off his meal when Maggie's approach disturbed his rest. The leopard's acute hearing detected Maggie's movement long before she came into view. He dropped silently from the tree perch and began stalking her through the undergrowth, his spotted coat providing perfect camouflage in the dappled light. The predator moved with fluid grace, placing each paw carefully to avoid making sound. Maggie was bent over examining some interesting seed pods when the leopard struck. He launched himself from the shadows with explosive power, his 150-pound frame slamming into her back and driving her to the ground. Before she could scream or struggle, his jaws clamped on the back of her neck, canine teeth punching through vertebrae and severing her spinal cord. Maggie's body went limp instantly as her nervous system shut down. The leopard maintained his grip for several seconds, his powerful jaw muscles ensuring the kill was complete before releasing her and stepping back. Blood pooled beneath Maggie's motionless form as the leopard began its instinctive process of preparing to drag his kill to a more secure location. Thabo realized that Maggie was missing when the group stopped for a water break 20 minutes later. He immediately began backtracking along the trail, calling her name and scanning the bush for any sign of movement. Other tourists waited nervously as their guide's calls grew more urgent. Thabo found Maggie's body in the thicket 40 minutes after she disappeared. The leopard had already begun feeding, and there was nothing the guide could do except secure the scene and radio for help. Park rangers arrived within the hour, but the leopard had vanished into the dense vegetation. Maggie was pronounced dead at the scene, her neck broken and body showing clear signs of leopard predation. The investigation confirmed she had violated safety protocols by separating from the group, but no charges were filed against the tour operator. Chobe National Park implemented additional safety measures, including mandatory head counts every 15 minutes during walking safaris. The leopard was never located, despite the extensive tracking efforts. Officials determined relocating the animal was unnecessary since it had acted according to its natural predatory instincts when defending territory. New warning signs were posted at trailheads, emphasizing the dangers of leaving designated paths. Maggie's memorial service in Massachusetts was attended by hundreds of former students and colleagues who remembered her passion for teaching and love of the natural world. Her family donated her extensive collection of nature books to the school library and established a scholarship fund for students pursuing wildlife biology careers. It was August 22, 2016, when the sun hung high over the pristine waterways of the Okavango Delta in Botswana, casting shimmering reflections across the maze of channels that snake through this UNESCO World Heritage Site. The delta's crystal-clear waters were deceptively calm, hiding one of Africa's most dangerous predators beneath their tranquil surface. This aquatic paradise, where papyrus reeds sway gently in the breeze and colorful kingfishers dart between lily pads, would become the final destination for Taylor McKinney, a 31-year-old investment banker from Chicago, Illinois. Taylor had arrived in Botswana with his new wife Sarah for their dream honeymoon, a 2-week luxury safari adventure through some of Africa's most spectacular wilderness areas. Known among his friends for his competitive swimming background and overconfident attitude around water, Taylor often took unnecessary risks to impress others, especially his bride. The couple had booked an exclusive Makoko safari, traveling through the delta's narrow channels in traditional dugout canoes guided by local experts. Their experienced guide had repeatedly warned them about the crocodile-infested waters and emphasized the critical importance of never entering the water under any circumstances. The delta's intricate network of channels and lagoons provided perfect hunting grounds for Nile crocodiles, and the guide's warnings carried the weight of decades of experience in these treacherous waters. Nile crocodiles are among Africa's most formidable predators, capable of growing up to 20 feet in length and weighing over 1,500 pounds. These ancient reptiles possess one of the strongest bite forces in the animal kingdom, generating up to 3,700 pounds of pressure per square inch. Their powerful jaws contain 64 to 68 sharp canonical teeth designed for gripping and tearing flesh. Crocodiles are ambush predators that can remain motionless underwater for up to an hour, perfectly camouflaged against the muddy bottom. When they strike, they can accelerate from 0 to 25 miles per hour in a single explosive burst, making escape virtually impossible for their victims. At 6:30 p.m., as the golden hour light painted the delta in warm hues, Taylor made his fatal mistake. Sarah's expensive camera had slipped from their Makoko and sunk into 4 feet of murky water in a narrow channel. Despite their guide's urgent warnings and Sarah's pleas, Taylor dove into the crocodile-infested waters to retrieve the camera. The recent rains had stirred up sediment, limiting underwater visibility to less than 2 feet. Taylor's confident swimming strokes and splashing movements created vibrations that traveled through the water, alerting every predator in the vicinity to his presence. A massive 14-foot Nile crocodile had been lying motionless on the channel bottom, perfectly camouflaged among the fallen logs and debris. The 800-pound reptile had been waiting patiently for prey when Taylor's disturbance triggered its predatory instincts. As Taylor dove down searching for the camera, his legs kicking frantically in the murky water, the crocodile began its approach from directly below. The ancient predator moved with deadly precision, its powerful tail propelling it upward through the water column. The crocodile struck with devastating force, its massive jaws clamping down on Taylor's left leg just above the knee. The crushing bite force of 3,700 pounds per square inch instantly shattered his femur and crushed the surrounding muscle tissue. Taylor's scream was cut short as the crocodile immediately initiated its infamous death roll, a hunting technique perfected over millions of years of evolution. The massive reptile spun rapidly in the water, twisting Taylor's body like a rag doll while maintaining its bone-crushing grip. The violent rotation snapped Taylor's femur completely and dislocated his hip joint within the first 3 rolls. His body was dragged deeper underwater with each spin, and the muddy water quickly turned crimson with blood from his catastrophic injuries. The crocodile's serrated teeth acted like saw blades, tearing through muscle, tendons, and blood vessels as it continued its relentless death roll. After 6 complete rotations, the reptile's teeth had severed Taylor's femoral artery, causing massive hemorrhaging that clouded the water in a spreading pool of red. Water rushed into Taylor's lungs as he was held underwater, his body spinning helplessly in the crocodile's grip. The combination of drowning, massive blood loss, and traumatic shock caused his cardiovascular system to fail rapidly. Within 3 minutes, all movement had ceased. The crocodile maintained its grip for several more seconds before dragging Taylor's lifeless body toward deeper water, where it disappeared beneath the surface to begin feeding in the safety of its underwater lair. Botswana wildlife authorities launched an extensive search and recovery operation, but Taylor's remains were never found despite days of intensive efforts. The investigation concluded that he had ignored explicit safety warnings and entered dangerous waters during peak crocodile activity hours. His death prompted renewed safety protocols for Makoko operations throughout the Delta, with stricter enforcement of water entry prohibitions.
It was February 19, 2013, and the mist-shrouded mountains of Virunga National Park provided sanctuary for some of the world's last remaining mountain gorillas. Catherine Williams had been volunteering with a gorilla conservation program for 4 months, working to protect these magnificent creatures from poaching and habitat destruction. The 26-year-old veterinary student from Vancouver had developed a deep emotional connection to the gorilla families she helped monitor, often staying late at the research station to observe their behavior. Catherine Williams had always dreamed of working with endangered species, choosing veterinary medicine specifically to pursue a career in wildlife conservation. Her volunteer position at Virunga represented the culmination of years of study and preparation, offering hands-on experience with one of the world's most endangered primates. Catherine's dedication to her work was evident in her willingness to extend her volunteer period and take on additional responsibilities beyond her original assignment. The conservation program where Catherine worked focused on monitoring gorilla health and behavior while protecting them them from the constant threat of poaching. The work required researchers to maintain close contact with habituated gorilla families, observing their daily activities and documenting any signs of illness or injury. Catherine had been assigned to work with a family group led by a large silverback male who had been showing signs of respiratory illness. That morning, Catherine was conducting a routine health assessment of the gorilla family when she noticed that the silverback's condition appeared to be worsening. The massive male was showing signs of lethargy and had been coughing frequently, symptoms that could indicate a serious respiratory infection that might spread to other members of the group. Mountain gorillas are incredibly powerful primates, with adult silverbacks weighing up to 440 pounds and possessing strength estimated at 10 times that of an adult human. Despite their generally peaceful nature, gorillas can become extremely dangerous when they feel threatened or are protecting their family group. Silverbacks are particularly aggressive when ill or stressed, as their leadership role requires them to defend their group against any perceived threats. Their massive hands, powerful arms, and large canine teeth make them capable of inflicting fatal injuries even without malicious intent. Catherine's concern for the silverback's health led her to approach closer than normal protocol allowed, hoping to get a better assessment of his breathing patterns and overall condition. She had worked with this particular family for months and believed she understood their individual personalities and tolerance levels, but illness had made the silverback unpredictable and more aggressive than usual. As Catherine moved within the silverback's personal space to observe his breathing, the massive gorilla interpreted her approach as a threat to his weakened condition and his family's safety. Gorillas communicate through body language and territorial displays, but Catherine's focus on his medical condition caused her to miss the warning signs that should have prompted her to retreat. The silverback's attack was sudden and devastating, his massive hands grabbing Catherine and pulling her to the ground, while his powerful arms delivered crushing blows to her head and torso. The gorilla's incredible strength made resistance impossible as he continued his assault, his protective instincts driving him to eliminate what he perceived as a threat to his family. Catherine's screams echoed through the forest, alerting her colleagues who were working with other gorilla groups in the area. They arrived to find the silverback still attacking Catherine, his violent behavior preventing them from immediately intervening to help their colleague. The researchers eventually managed to drive the gorilla away using noise and distraction techniques, but Catherine had already sustained fatal injuries from the prolonged attack. The remote mountain location meant that medical evacuation would take hours, and Catherine died from massive trauma before help could arrive. The investigation revealed that Catherine had violated safety protocols by approaching too close to an ill and stressed silverback without proper backup from other researchers. Her death led to revised safety guidelines for gorilla research and highlighted the unpredictable nature of wild gorilla behavior, even among animals that had been habituated to human presence. Catherine's tragic death served as a reminder that even the most dedicated conservationists could fall victim to the unpredictable nature of wild animals, and that emotional connections to wildlife could lead to dangerous lapses in judgment. Her story became a cautionary tale within the conservation community about the importance of maintaining professional distance and following safety protocols when working with potentially dangerous species.
It was October 12, 2014, and the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the vast grasslands of Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe. The dry season had turned the landscape into a patchwork of golden grass and scattered acacia trees, with seasonal waterholes serving as magnets for abundant wildlife. Jake Morrison was 26 and addicted to adrenaline. The construction worker from Sydney had spent his savings on this African adventure with his older brother Tom, determined to collect stories that would impress his mates back home. Jake had always been the family risk taker, jumping off cliffs, riding motorcycles too fast, never backing down from dares. Tom, 3 years older and considerably more cautious, had tried talking his brother out of reckless ideas during their week-long trip. But Jake was determined to push boundaries, constantly asking their guide about getting closer shots and expressing frustration with safety restrictions keeping them confined to their vehicle. Their guide, Blessing, was an experienced local ranger who had been leading safaris through Hwange for over a decade. He'd developed a sixth sense for recognizing dangerous situations before they developed. That afternoon, he'd been particularly firm about staying in the vehicle when they encountered a pride of lions resting near a waterhole. African lions are social predators living in family groups called prides, typically consisting of related females, their cubs, and one or more dominant males. When threatened or protecting young, multiple lions coordinate their attacks with devastating efficiency. Female lions, though smaller than males, are actually more dangerous in groups due to the superior hunting skills and their protective instincts toward cubs. The pride consisted of 3 adult females and 4 young cubs, all resting in the shade of a large baobab tree about 50 yards from the waterhole. The lioness appeared relaxed, occasionally grooming each other or watching cubs play in the dust. But Blessing knew appearances could be deceiving. Female lions with cubs are among Africa's most dangerous animals. Jake studied the pride through his camera's telephoto lens, growing increasingly frustrated with the distance in the vehicle's presence in shots. Against Blessing's explicit warnings and Tom's desperate pleas, Jake quietly opened the vehicle door and stepped onto the ground. He moved slowly at first, camera raised, believing he could get quick shots and return to safety. The lionesses noticed Jake's movement immediately. Their relaxed postures changed to alert attention as they tracked the human intruder with predatory focus. The cubs, sensing their mother's tension, stopped playing and huddled closer to the adults. Jake had closed the distance to about 30 yards when the pride's protective instincts overrode natural caution around humans. 2 lionesses rose simultaneously and began moving toward him with purposeful strides. Their ears flattened against their skulls, tails twitched with agitation, and low growls rumbled from their chests. Jake finally recognized the danger and turned to run back toward the vehicle. But 30 yards was far too close to 3 protective mothers, and his sudden movement triggered the fatal attack response. The first lioness launched herself at Jake with explosive speed, covering the distance in 3 powerful bounds. The lioness struck Jake from behind, her 300-pound frame driving him face first into the hard-packed earth. Before he could roll over or attempt defense, her jaws clamped down on the back of his neck, canine teeth punching through vertebrae with crushing force. The second lioness arrived seconds later, claws raking across his back and shoulders as she joined the attack. Jake's scream cut off abruptly as his spinal cord severed. His body convulsed once, then went completely limp as the 2 lionesses continued their assault. The third female remained with the cubs, watching the attack with alert attention but not participating. Tom watched in horror from beside the vehicle as his younger brother was killed just yards away. Blessing had already radioed for emergency assistance, but both men knew there was nothing they could do without becoming victims themselves. The attack lasted less than 30 seconds before the lionesses stepped back, satisfied the threat to their cubs had been eliminated. Park rangers arrived within 20 minutes, but Jake was already dead from massive trauma to his neck and spinal cord. The lionesses had returned to their cubs and showed no further aggression toward the humans. The investigation cleared Blessing of wrongdoing, confirming Jake had violated explicit safety instructions by leaving the vehicle. Wangay National Park used the incident to reinforce safety protocols and began requiring signed waivers acknowledging the lethal dangers of approaching wildlife on foot. Jake's funeral in Sydney was attended by hundreds of friends and co-workers who remembered his infectious enthusiasm and fearless approach to life. Tom struggled with survivor's guilt for years afterward, eventually becoming an advocate for wildlife safety education to prevent similar tragedies. It was June 8, 2017, when the morning sun cast long shadows across the endless golden grasslands of the Masai Mara National Reserve in Kenya. The vast savanna stretched to the horizon, punctuated by scattered acacia trees and rocky outcroppings that provided shelter for countless species of African wildlife. This iconic landscape, where the great wildebeest migration thunders across ancient plains, would become the final destination for Olivia Harrington, a 22-year-old recent college graduate from Portland, Oregon. Olivia had traveled to Kenya with 3 college friends to celebrate their graduation, embarking on what they believe would be the adventure of a lifetime. As a pre-veterinary student passionate about wildlife conservation, she had dreamed of experiencing Africa's magnificent animals in their natural habitat. Known among her friends for her impulsive nature and desire to get close to wildlife for the perfect photograph, Olivia often acted on emotion rather than caution. The group had booked a budget camping safari with minimal professional supervision. Their local guides had repeatedly explained the extreme danger of approaching lions, especially during the early morning hours when these apex predators were most active. African lions are the undisputed rulers of the savanna, with adult females weighing up to 280 pounds and possessing incredible speed and agility. These apex predators can reach speeds of 35 miles per hour in short bursts and leap distances of up to 36 feet. Their powerful jaws generate a bite force of 650 pounds per square inch, while their retractable claws can extend up to 1.5 inches in length. Lionesses are particularly dangerous when protecting cubs, as their maternal instincts override all other considerations, making them willing to attack any perceived threat regardless of size. At 6:15 a.m., as the Kenyan sunrise painted the grasslands in shades of golden amber, Olivia spotted a lioness with 2 small cubs resting beneath a large acacia tree. The scene appeared peaceful and photogenic, exactly the type of intimate wildlife moment she had traveled thousands of miles to capture. Against the urgent protest of her 3 friends who remained safely by their safari vehicle, Olivia approached on foot with her camera, determined to get close-up shots of the cubs for her wildlife photography portfolio. The 280-pound lioness immediately recognized the approaching threat and stood to position herself between Olivia and her vulnerable offspring. At 30 yards distance, the lioness began displaying unmistakable signs of aggression. Her ears flattened against her skull, her tail lashed violently from side to side, and low, rumbling growls emanated from deep within her chest. These were clear warning signals that any experienced guide would have recognized as an immediate call to retreat. But Olivia continued advancing, focused entirely on capturing the perfect shot through her camera viewfinder. When Olivia reached 20 yards from the cubs, the lioness's protective instincts overrode any remaining tolerance. Without further warning, she launched into a devastating charge, her powerful muscles propelling her across the distance at maximum speed. The lioness covered the 20-yard gap in less than 3 seconds, reaching her top speed of 35 miles per hour as she closed in on what she perceived as a mortal threat to her cubs. Olivia turned to flee but managed only 4 desperate steps before the lioness struck her from behind with tremendous force. The cat's front paws, each weighing over 30 pounds, hit Olivia's back like sledgehammers, driving her face first into the hard-packed earth with bone-crushing impact. The lioness's razor-sharp claws, extended to their full 1.5-inch length, raked across Olivia's spine, tearing through her clothing and flesh to reach the vertebrae beneath. The lioness's powerful jaws immediately clamped down on the back of Olivia's neck, her 4-inch canine teeth penetrating through skin, muscle, and into the cervical spine. The crushing bite force of 650 pounds per square inch instantly fractured the C3 vertebra, severing Olivia's spinal cord and causing immediate paralysis from the neck down. The lioness shook her massive head violently from side to side, causing catastrophic damage to the surrounding tissue and blood vessels. The violent shaking motion tore through Olivia's carotid arteries and jugular veins, causing massive hemorrhaging that quickly pooled beneath her motionless body. Her cardiovascular system began failing rapidly as blood pressure dropped to critical levels. Within 4 minutes, cardiac arrest occurred due to the combination of spinal cord trauma, massive blood loss, and shock. The lioness maintained her grip for several more minutes before releasing her hold. After confirming that Olivia posed no further danger to her cubs, the lioness began feeding on the soft tissue areas, starting with the abdominal region. Her friends, who had fled to their vehicle in terror, waited 45 minutes before the lioness and her cubs moved away from the scene, allowing them to approach and discover Olivia's partially consumed remains. Kenyan wildlife authorities conducted a thorough investigation that concluded Olivia had violated fundamental safari safety protocols by approaching dangerous wildlife on foot. Her death prompted renewed emphasis on tourist education programs throughout Kenya's national parks.
It was September 12, 2015, the late afternoon sun casting amber light across the reeds of the Okavango Delta. At the helm of a small aluminum motorboat, Cabello, a 19-year-old guide in training, eased the bow away from the main channel and toward a thin break in the papyrus. Cabello had grown up in Maun, the dusty gateway town on the southern edge of the delta, where tourism underpinned nearly every household. His father worked maintenance at a mid-range lodge, repairing generators and patching walkways between guest tents. His mother sold hand-woven baskets and carved animals at a roadside stall, frequented by tour vans. From a young age, Cabello had watched safari guides move easily between worlds, fluent in English and Setswana, confident on the water, respected by both lodge managers and visitors. The job promised something rare in Maun: stability, tips paid in foreign currency, and a future that did not depend entirely on seasonal labor. After finishing secondary school, Cabello secured an apprenticeship with a budget motorboat operation that catered primarily to backpackers and gap-year travelers. The company ran on thin margins and thinner oversight. Boats were turned around quickly, maintenance was reactive rather than scheduled, and junior staff were promoted to solo runs as soon as they demonstrated basic competence. Cabello received a short orientation, shadowed a senior guide for a handful of trips, and was soon entrusted with his own excursions. There was no formal certification process and no written examination on wildlife behavior beyond general warnings delivered during morning briefings. In just 3 months, Cabello learned the main arteries of the delta well enough to move between camps without incident. He could read surface currents, avoid visible sandbanks, and manage the temperamental outboard motor with passable confidence. What he lacked was a deeper understanding of hippo territorial behavior and seasonal movement patterns, knowledge typically acquired over years, often through close calls and hard-earned caution. This particular trip was meant to be uncomplicated, a late afternoon sunset photography excursion with a single German tourist out along the main channel and back before dusk. The guest had requested water-level shots and reed-line reflections, nothing out of the ordinary. Hippopotamuses are estimated to cause several hundred human deaths in Africa each year, making them among the continent's deadliest large animals. Bull hippos, especially solitary males, are aggressively territorial, defending stretches of water they use for resting and access routes to grazing areas. During the dry season, when water levels drop and channels constrict, these territories overlap, and tensions increase. An adult male can weigh up to 4,000 pounds, and despite its size, can sprint short distances on land at speeds approaching 20 miles per hour. Its jaws can open to nearly 150 degrees, exposing thick, curved canines that can reach approximately 18 inches in length. The bite force generated when those jaws close is sufficient to crush bone, shear through aluminum, and split small boats. The channel Cabello chose was barely 15 feet wide at its widest point, hemmed in by papyrus reeds that rose well above head height. Earlier that morning, during the operation's informal safety briefing, a senior guide had specifically mentioned increased hippo activity in side channels due to dropping water levels. Several routes were identified as off-limits until the next flood cycle. According to later statements, Cabello had nodded along with the others, saying nothing. When the boat entered the narrow cut that afternoon, the tourist passenger recalled Cabello mentioning that they were taking a faster way back to camp, adding casually that he knew the area well. What the passenger did not know was that Cabello had navigated this particular channel only once before, months earlier during high water, when depth and visibility made it marginally safer. At that time of year, the reeds sat lower in the water and hippos tended to remain in broader lagoons. In September, conditions were very different. Local fishermen avoided the channel entirely during the dry season, a practice passed down and widely understood among experienced guides. It was not written on any map, but it was common knowledge. By around 4 p.m., the small motorboat idled into the reed corridor, its engine note dull and muted by the vegetation. The main channel lay less than 200 yards to the west, open, sunlit, and carrying the distant sound of other boats. The shortcut promised to save perhaps 10 minutes. Cabello was already behind schedule after a late departure, and the light was beginning to soften toward evening. As the reeds closed in, visibility dropped to under 6 feet. The water darkened with disturbed sediment, opaque and unreadable. The tourist raised his camera, pleased by the sense of immersion, unaware that they had entered the most dangerous terrain possible for a hippo encounter. Moments later, the boat's propeller struck submerged vegetation with a grinding vibration that shuddered through the hull. Cabello immediately cut the throttle. The engine sputtered and fell silent. No kill switch lanyard had been clipped to his wrist, and neither he nor the passenger wore life jackets, omissions that investigators would later cite as basic safety failures. Cabello stood at the stern, leaning over the transom to inspect the motor and clear the fouled propeller. The boat drifted, nearly motionless. The water beside the hull bulged upward without warning. A bull hippo surfaced with explosive force, its massive head breaking through the surface just 3 feet from the aluminum side. Water sheeted off its skin as it exhaled sharply. The animal targeted the source of the mechanical vibration, striking the outboard motor at the stern with a massive upward lunge. The impact shattered the engine's lower unit and pitched the hull sharply to starboard. The impact produced a loud metallic boom that echoed down the channel and sent a shock through the hull. According to the tourist's later account, the sudden lurch threw Cabello off balance and pitched him partially over the gunwale, his lower body plunging into the water while his upper torso remained caught against the stern. He reached for the motor mount, which was now slick with a mixture of river water and leaking hydraulic fluid from the shattered engine, and failed to secure a grip. The hippo surged again, registering the splashing legs in the water as a direct territorial intrusion. Its jaws opened wide as it lunged upward. The canines closed around Cabello's pelvis, while he was still half submerged, half trapped against the boat. His scream was audible above the reeds, short and abrupt. The force of the jaws functioned like a hydraulic press, fracturing bone and rupturing internal organs. Witness statements indicated that Cabello lost voluntary movement within seconds, his body going slack almost immediately. The tourist remained in the bow, shouting repeatedly for help, his voice carrying but unanswered in the isolated channel. The hippo dragged Cabello beneath the surface with a powerful downward motion. For several seconds, the water boiled and churned, reeds snapping and bending outward. Cabello's head briefly broke the surface, pressed against the animal's jaw, his eyes unfocused and his limbs unresponsive, consistent with rapid loss of consciousness. The hippo submerged again, pulling him under. When they surfaced a final time, there was no visible movement. The tourist managed to restart the engine and maneuver the damaged boat back toward the main channel, then onto the muddy shoreline. He ran along the bank, shouting and waving, until staff from a nearby camp responded and launched a boat. They reached the site approximately 23 minutes later. Cabello's body was recovered downstream, wedged against a fallen tree where the current had slowed. The injuries were catastrophic. Identification was made through his clothing and the operator's passenger manifest. The coroner's report documented massive pelvic disintegration, bilateral femur fractures, extensive soft tissue destruction across the lower abdomen and thighs, and water inhalation. Death was attributed to crushing trauma, followed by fatal blood loss and drowning. The safari operator's license was suspended pending a formal investigation. Findings cited inadequate staff training, failure to enforce route restrictions, and lax safety protocols. The channel was later marked as restricted during low water periods, though enforcement remained inconsistent across operators. Cabello's family received a modest settlement that covered little more than funeral expenses. Within 6 months, another guide in training was hired to fill his position.
It was May 3rd, 2013, and the African night had settled over the Serengeti with velvet darkness. The camping area where Harry and Dorothy Jameson had pitched their tent was a small clearing surrounded by acacia trees, with the vast Tanzanian grassland stretching beyond flickering campfire light. Harry Jameson was 71 and set in his ways. The retired Iowa farmer had spent 50 years working land, dealing with livestock, and solving problems with practical solutions. He'd agreed to this African safari as a 50th wedding anniversary gift to Dorothy, though he privately thought safety restrictions were excessive and guides overly cautious. The budget camping safari had been Dorothy's compromise between her dream of seeing African wildlife and their limited retirement income. Instead of luxury lodges, they stayed in basic tents with shared facilities. Guided by local rangers who emphasized safety protocols, Harry found increasingly irritating. Their campsite was located in a remote Serengeti section, far from the main tourist routes but rich in wildlife activity. During the day, they'd seen elephants, giraffes, zebras, and numerous antelope species. But as darkness fell, the African bush transformed into a different world where predators ruled. Spotted hyenas are among Africa's most successful predators, living in large social groups called clans that can number up to 80 individuals. Despite their reputation as scavengers, hyenas are skilled hunters capable of bringing down prey as large as a wildebeest. They possess the strongest bite force of any mammal, with jaws capable of crushing bones other predators cannot break. Hyenas are primarily nocturnal and drawn to human settlements by food scent. That evening, the camp guides gave their usual safety briefing. Never leave tents after dark without escort, always use flashlights, and immediately alert guards about unusual sounds. Harry listened with barely concealed impatience, muttering about treating grown adults like children. Around midnight, Harry woke needing to use the bathroom facilities located about 50 yards from their tent. Dorothy stirred, asking if he wanted her to call for guard escort. Harry dismissed her concerns, insisting a quick bathroom walk hardly required armed escort. Harry unzipped the tent flap and stepped into the African night without a flashlight, relying on his memory of the campsite layout to navigate in the darkness. What he didn't know was that a clan of spotted hyenas had been scavenging around the camp's waste disposal area for several nights, growing bold from finding food scraps. Harry was halfway to the bathroom when he encountered the first hyena. The animal emerged from behind the supply tent, its distinctive sloped silhouette barely visible in the starlight. Harry stopped walking, assuming it was a dog or harmless scavenger. He made soft clicking sounds, the same noises he'd used to calm nervous livestock back home. The hyena's response was immediate and terrifying. It began the distinctive whooping call that gave the species its name, a sound that carried across the night air like demonic laughter. Within seconds, answering calls echoed from multiple directions as other clan members converged on Harry's location. Harry finally realized his danger and turned to run back toward his tent, but the hyenas were already surrounding him. The lead female, weighing nearly 150 pounds, approached Harry with purposeful strides, while the other clan members circled to cut off his escape routes. Harry stumbled in darkness, his 71-year-old legs unable to match the speed and agility of his pursuers. The first hyena reached him just as he fell, her powerful jaws clamping down on his left leg with bone-crushing force. Harry's scream shattered the night silence as more hyenas joined the attack. Clan's assault was methodical and devastating. Multiple hyenas bit and tore at Harry's legs, arms, and torso, while he thrashed helplessly on the ground. Their jaws, designed to crack the bones of large prey animals, easily tore through human flesh and muscle. Harry's screams grew weaker as shock and blood loss took their toll. Dorothy's cries for help from inside their tent alerted the camp guards, who came running with flashlights and rifles. But the hyenas had already inflicted fatal damage, and Harry was unconscious from blood loss by the time guards drove off the clan with warning shots and bright lights. Emergency medical personnel worked frantically to stabilize Harry, but his injuries were too severe. He'd lost massive amounts of blood from multiple bite wounds, and several major arteries had been severed. Harry died in the camp's medical tent before the helicopter could arrive for evacuation. The investigation confirmed Harry had violated explicit safety protocols by leaving his tent unescorted after dark. The tour company faced no legal liability but implemented additional security measures, including motion sensor lights around bathroom facilities and mandatory radio check-ins for nighttime movements. The hyena clan was monitored by park rangers for several days but showed no unusual aggression toward other humans. Officials determined the animals had acted according to their natural opportunistic behavior and required no intervention beyond increased camp security. Harry's funeral in Iowa was attended by hundreds of neighbors and fellow farmers who remembered his dedication to land and family. Dorothy established a scholarship fund for agricultural students in his memory, hoping his practical problem-solving approach might inspire future generations. It was October 14th, 2018, when the African sun began its descent toward the horizon over the vast plains of Serengeti National Park in Tanzania. The golden grassland stretched endlessly in all directions, dotted with scattered acacia trees and rocky hope trees that served as vantage points for the park's apex predators. As twilight approached, the sounds of the African wilderness grew more intense, signaling the beginning of the nocturnal hunting period. This legendary landscape would become the final destination for Stephanie Rowland, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher from Austin, Texas. Stephanie had traveled to Tanzania with her husband Mark and their 2 children, ages 8 and 10, on what was meant to be an educational safari adventure. Known for her protective maternal instincts and hands-on teaching approach, she had spent months planning this trip to give her children a real-world education about African wildlife. The family had booked a guided camping safari that allowed them to experience the wilderness more intimately. Their experienced guide had repeatedly emphasized the critical importance of staying near their vehicle at all times, especially during dawn and dusk when lions are most active. African lions are the ultimate nocturnal predators, with adult females weighing up to 300 pounds and possessing extraordinary night vision that is 6 times more sensitive than human eyesight. These apex predators hunt primarily during twilight and nighttime hours, using coordinated pack tactics perfected over thousands of years. Their powerful jaws generate a crushing bite force of 650 pounds per square inch, while their retractable claws can extend up to 1.5 inches in length. Lions are capable of moving completely silently through tall grass, making them virtually undetectable until the moment they strike, at 7:45 p.m. As darkness settled over the Serengeti, Stephanie made her fatal mistake. She left the safety of their campsite to use the designated bathroom located 100 yards away from their tents. The sun had set 30 minutes earlier, and visibility was severely limited in the fading twilight. Despite her husband's concerns, Stephanie walked confidently along the familiar path, having made this same trip several times without incident. A pride of lions have been hunting in the area throughout the evening, and the scent of humans from the nearby campsite had attracted their attention. 2 lionesses had positioned themselves strategically along the path, using the tall grass and scattered bushes as perfect camouflage. Their golden coats blended seamlessly with the dried savanna grass, making them virtually invisible in the dim light. Stephanie was 50 yards from the bathroom facilities when she heard rustling in the grass to her left. She stopped and peered into the darkness, unable to see the 300-pound lioness crouched just 15 yards away. The predator had been tracking her scent and movement for several minutes, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. As Stephanie turned to continue walking, the lioness detected the movement and prepared to attack. The second lioness had circled around behind Stephanie, positioning herself for a coordinated assault. When Stephanie resumed walking, both cats moved simultaneously. The first lioness charged from the left side, covering the 15-yard distance in less than 2 seconds at full speed. Her powerful muscles propelled her through the air in a devastating leap that struck Stephanie in the torso with tremendous force. The impact knocked Stephanie sideways to the ground, and the lioness's razor-sharp claws immediately raked across her shoulder and neck area. The 4-inch claws penetrated deep into her flesh, severing major blood vessels and causing massive hemorrhaging. Before Stephanie could react, the second lioness arrived and seized her legs, preventing any possibility of escape. The first lioness repositioned her attack, clamping her powerful jaws down on Stephanie's throat with crushing force. Her 4-inch canine teeth punctured through skin and muscle, penetrating the carotid artery and jugular vein simultaneously. The bite force of 650 pounds per square inch completely crushed her windpipe, cutting off her air supply instantly. Wolf lionesses used their combined weight of 600 pounds to pin Stephanie's body completely to the ground. The first lioness maintained their grip on the throat while shaking her massive head from side to side, causing maximum damage to the vital structures in her neck. The violent shaking motion tore through muscle tissue, blood vessels, and nerve pathways, causing catastrophic trauma. Stephanie's cardiovascular system began failing rapidly as blood pressure dropped to critical levels due to the severed arteries. The combination of massive blood loss, crushed windpipe, and traumatic shock caused her to lose consciousness within 90 seconds. Cardiac arrest occurred shortly afterward as her body succumbed to the multiple traumatic injuries. The lioness immediately began feeding, starting with the soft abdominal area. They dragged portions of her body over 200 yards from the original attack site, scattering the remains across a wide area as they consumed their prey throughout the night. When Stephanie failed to return to camp, her family raised the alarm, and searchers were dispatched immediately. Tanzanian wildlife authorities conducted a comprehensive investigation that concluded she had violated fundamental safety protocols by traveling alone after dark during peak predator activity hours. Her death prompted stricter enforcement of campsite safety rules throughout Serengeti National Park.
Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.